there are 2 times a year that you really don't, as a preacher, have to think much about what you're going to preach on. Those are Christmas and Easter, because it's pretty much written socially that you're going to preach at Christmas about the birth of Jesus. And at Easter, that you're going to have to, or not have to, but you're going to preach about the resurrection, and that's what people expect. And that's not a bad thing, because those are definitely things that need to be celebrated. But as the guy that follows up Easter, what do you preach on? As I was going throughout my life, I was talking to a person who didn't attend church, who was managing. He said, I wish my job was so easy as just to have to do a book report once a week. And of course, he didn't really get the concept of preaching. There's a great responsibility in trying to understand what God would have to speak to his congregation. So would you bow with me as we go before the Lord? Father, I ask that you would yield me to your Spirit, that you would speak to your people, that these would be the words of God, not the words of men. Father, I ask that you would minister to hearts despite me, despite my weakness and my infirmity. Lord, I ask that you would use me. Father, I ask that you would prepare the hearts of those that are about to hear this message. Lord, glorify your Son and all his Son. We love you and we ask these things in his name. So what did I come up with? The answer is in John chapter 21. So if you would, please turn there with me to John chapter 21. It's the last chapter of the Gospels. So, like I said, what happens after Easter? Sometimes when we read about the resurrection, we're happy and we're excited, and we kind of make a rush for the door to be able to get to Acts, because that's when the church really starts doing good. But sometimes we don't live on those seeing 3,000 people converted in a day sort of days. I mean, every now and again it just happens that you're not going to see those kind of mountaintop experiences. So I think it's important for us today to look at, in John chapter 21, some of the things that happened between the resurrection and the Holy Spirit coming. So in John chapter 21, verse 1, it says, "After these things, Jesus showed himself again to the disciples of the Sea of Tiberias, and on this wise showed he himself." The question becomes, after what things? Later on, the apostle tells us that Jesus had shown himself twice to the apostles, to the disciples. The first time Thomas wasn't there, and since Thomas said, "I won't believe unless I stick my fingers into his side and the prints in his hands," he shows up and makes a repeat appearance. This is something that is pretty well documented. If 2 people show up in the courtroom and say the same thing happened, it happened. So why should we doubt that these things happened the day after? In verse 2, he tells us, "There was together Simon Peter, and Thomas called Didymus, and Nathanael of Cana in Galilee, and the sons of Zebedee, and 2 other of his disciples. Simon Peter saith unto them, I go a fishing. They say unto him, we also go with thee. They went forth and entered into a ship immediately, and that night they caught nothing." So what do you do after Jesus dies and then gets up and he just kind of pops in together? Well, we know that the disciples, they prayed quite a bit, but where do we go from there? Where do we go from we're walking around and there's this triumphal entry, and I mean this emotional roller coaster of he's dead, he's not dead, we don't see him, we've hung out with this guy every day for 3.5 years, and now he has someplace else to be. Where do you go with that? Well, you can take this passage in any number of ways, I'm sure, but some people would like to say Peter's the guy, so he went fishing, and oh, we got some downtime before the Holy Spirit shows up, so we're going to go fishing. That's what we're going to do. I don't take it that way at all. I'm looking at the text, and I've spent quite a bit of time looking at it this week. It seems to me that Peter was going fishing, and he really wasn't planning on coming back from fishing. It looked to me like he was going, well, I was a fisherman before, and I've got to make a wage, and God hadn't told us anything else to do yet, so want to go make a living. Which making a living is not a bad thing as long as it's what God wants you to do. And in this case, he hadn't had any other direction. But the rest of them, I mean, the sons of James and John, they were the sons of Zebedee. They were fishermen beforehand. They were probably, or a lot of these guys were from the fishing village. They were probably just going back to fishing. Because we're not following Jesus around right now, so what else are we going to do? So it's kind of common sense that they're going to take up their career. Let's look on in verse 4. It says, "But when the morning was now come, Jesus stood on the shore, but the disciples knew not that it was Jesus. Then Jesus saith unto them, Children, have ye any meat? They answered him, No. He said unto them, Cast the net on the right side of the ship, and ye shall find. They cast therefore, and now they were not able to draw it in from the multitude of fishes." See, they had worked all night, and I'm sure you've all had those "I've worked all night" sort of days, where it seems like you never really got anything done. And you're discouraged, and you're ready to punch out, and it's just time to go to the house because we're not catching anything anyway, nothing's getting done. Why are we even out here? I'm not paying for the wind in the sails, or in modern day language, for the fuel in the boat. It's not worth it to be out here. And then some stranger that's just standing on the shore yells, "Hey, throw the net on the other side." This isn't real common sense, but they're still out in the ocean. Why not? By the way, it was dark, so I don't give them credit for not knowing that it wasn't Jesus off the top of their head, because it said they had fished all night. And he goes and he says, "Throw it on the other side of the boat." Has anybody seen a similarity onto where this might have happened in Peter's life anywhere about 3.5 years earlier? When Jesus came through, they don't all record the same way, the calling of Peter. They start out, and one of them who says, Jesus got into the boat, he said, "Cast out a little way." So we hadn't caught anything all night, so okay, we're washing nets anyway, we're getting ready to go to the house. He said, "Let down for a catch." In the same way, the net's almost broke. There's a reason why this is called the commissioning of Peter. I like to call it the recommissioning of Peter. He's getting put back into service. And I think I'll go ahead and tip my hand. I think some of us here at this church have gotten a little discouraged. I mean, that's the nature of sometimes in transitioning between leadership. And I think today we need to look at these verses and we need to understand that God has a commission, not just for Peter, but he has a commission for all of us. And we're going to see what that commission is as we press on. It says, and he says, verse 7, it says, "Therefore the disciple whom Jesus loved saith to Peter," you got to love how John and Peter have their little interchanges throughout this gospel. It's the disciple that Jesus loved, then there's Peter. He says, "It is the Lord." Now when Simon Peter heard it, that it was the Lord, he girt his fisher's coat unto him, for he was naked, and did cast himself into the sea. Verse 8 says, "And the other disciples came in the little ship, but they were not far from the land, but as it were 200, or about 300 feet, dragging the net with the fishes." How many of y'all have ever have been standing by the pool and somebody pushed you in? You had your shoes on, you had your cell phone on, you had your jeans on. I mean, maybe it's because I work with youth, I see a little more often. But the first thing that starts to happen when denim gets wet is people start going towards the bottom. And you know, these guys, there were a lot of sheep in Israel, so I'm going to guess they may have been wearing wool coats. When a sheep gets wet, it sinks. And every time I've ever gone to go jump in the river, to go swimming, I've taken off clothes. I haven't gone and put extra ones on. Peter was naked. I mean, I don't know if he was just wearing his underwear or what the Bible says he's naked. But he does something weird. He puts on his coat. Now, a few weeks earlier, he'd been warming himself by the fire. So I'd imagine that it was cold out, but he puts on his coat. Why would somebody put on a coat to jump in the water? I submit to you that in the same way that he said, I'm going fishing, by putting on that coat, he was saying, I'm going to Jesus. I'm not coming back. Y'all can keep the boat. You can keep the fish. I don't care. I'm going to Jesus. And when we see that, after we run out of our purpose, when we run out of what we perceive to be our commission, when we run out of encouragement, when that fire down in your belly is gone out, when you have that chance to get to Jesus, that's when you really run into him. You say, well, this is what I need. That's it. You can keep the ship. You can keep the car. You can keep the truck. You can keep the business. I need to go to Jesus. Let everybody else worry about the fish. Let everybody else worry about the boat. See, everybody else, they kind of paddled in. They said, well, it's not that far. We'll paddle in. Peter was needing that touch. He was needing to be with Jesus. And in this way, he comes and he took all that he ever really needed to come to Jesus. He jumped in and he wasn't planning on coming back. And I think sometimes we run into problems because we jump in and we still have a rope tied to the boat. I'll hold the boat with me. I ran out of gas on a sea-doo out in the middle of a big lake curve. Well, it wasn't my sea-doo, so I couldn't exactly leave it out there. Good thing it floats because I was about to start sinking. I was so tired. Got about 3/4 of the way across, somebody came and threw me a ski rope and said, tie on, I'll pull you in. You get tired trying to pull that boat. You get discouraged trying to pull that boat, even though you can see the land the whole time. It's not a huge lake. I mean, it's bigger than a mud puddle, but you get tired when you keep going and you keep working and you keep not catching fish. Maybe sometimes there's a boat that we're still tied to that we need to let go of to be able to come to Jesus. Am I communicating? I don't want to start naming names or pointing fingers at anything, at anybody, but okay, sometimes I need to let go of some stuff. And it's good stuff. It's not bad stuff. Maybe it's a little too much pride. Maybe it's a little too much convenience. We're going to talk about convenience here in a minute, so we'll hold off on that until it's time. Verse 9 he says, as soon as they would come to the land, they saw a fire of coals there and fish laid thereon and bread. Most of us probably wouldn't be excited about that, but when you hadn't eaten all night, that's dinner, not breakfast. So, that's good stuff, especially if you just got out. You're drenched, your coat's drenched, and it's cold outside. A fire with coals, that's where it's at. Verse 10 says, Jesus saith unto them, bring the fish which you have caught. Now, he had fish. I don't understand that one. Maybe I need to look a little bit more into it. But there were fish already there, and then he says, bring some more. Simon Peter went up and drew the net to land full of great fishes, and 153. And for all there were so many, yet was not the net broken. You can tell these people are fishermen. They start throwing in those details. Okay, I guess 153 is a lot of fish to us. I mean, they put in details because these were parts of their lives. And Jesus meets us in parts of our lives. He meets us in those comfort spots because, some messages I've sat in here and people were crying and bawling and coming to the altar and they didn't affect me a bit. Maybe it was the hardness of my heart, but I honestly just don't think I was in the same spot in my life that they were in theirs. And sometimes, it just needs to be God tailors that message for you. That's why you need to listen to all of them so you understand which ones you like. I'll put that in there. You got to listen to all of them to see if they're the ones that are really hitting you where you're at. But he goes and he says that even though there were 153, it was miraculous. The net was not broken. And he says, come down and dine. Jesus saith unto them, come and dine. None of the disciples dared to ask him, who are you, knowing that it was the Lord. See, he goes, then he takes the bread and gives thanks. He gives them fish. You see, this is kind of, in literary fashion, you think that Jesus was making a summary of everything that he'd done in the Gospel of John. recommissioning to the Last Supper. They knew who he was at this point. They weren't going to ask that, so they didn't have those same silly questions that they did beforehand. But there's this fellowship that comes with dining with somebody. They may have thought Jesus may be mad at us. We went back to fishing. We didn't wait in the room and stay in a prayer meeting. We went back to living a life that paid bills. But in a very real sense, Jesus not only gives them comfort like he did with his teachings, he's giving them fellowship, that table fellowship. Later on, Paul would rebuke Peter for breaking table fellowship with the Gentiles when Jews came around. Oh, the irony of it all. And sometimes the very things that we say, oh, I'll never be like that when I was young, you end up being just like that when you're older. But isn't it true that we need somebody that'll slap us, they'll love us enough to slap us, to wake us up, to bring us back to the way that we should be, the way that Paul did to Peter. A good Christian brother, a good Christian sister, a mentor, a disciple, somebody that knows you well enough that they can say, you're not being like you should be. Folks, that's one of the ways that we love, even though it's not convenient. He had this table fellowship with them, and he brought them back together. He said, we're going to skip forward a little bit into verse 15. I don't skip far. You're this big, you can't afford to. Verse 15 says, so when they had dined, Jesus saith unto them, or saith to, not to them, to Simon Peter, Simon, son of Jonas, lovest thou more than these? There's nobody else around. When I counted up, there were 7 of them. There's 7 people standing there with him and Jesus. He said, Simon, do you love me more than these? Do you love me more than the rest of the disciples? He's calling them back to when he said, Lord, if everybody else forsakes you, I'm still your man. I don't care if I have to go to death, to hell, I'll follow you to the gates. I'll follow you in. I'll be there for you. And when Jesus hung on that cross, he denied him 3 times. Isn't it amazing that Peter asked him 3 times, or Jesus asked him 3 times? And it's interesting here, I'm not going to bore you with the original languages and stuff, but you have to, our language is a little bit too clunky to really get a hold of what Jesus is saying, but he says, do you love me with that God kind of love? Do you love me like I love the church? Do you love me enough that you'd be inconvenienced for you, or for me? Peter's response is he saith unto him, Yea, Lord, thou knowest that I love thee. He doesn't even mention everybody else that's standing around him. He learned his lesson on that. He was humbled already. He understands that this is between you and me and not between me and them. Sometimes that may be the road, is that we're worried so much about me and them and not me and him. Do you understand where I'm going with this? That's a big thing, that it needs to be about. We're not putting on a show for folks. We're putting on a show for God. And that show comes from what's real and what's inside us. Folks, this is one of the things that gives us purpose in our lives, is that we are performing for our God. It is a sacred duty that I feel up here, that I would seek the Bible to say what God would have through his congregation. Folks, I'll be honest with you, that scares the daylights out of me. That's almost as silly as giving an 18-year-old a rifle, sending them halfway around the world and saying, okay, be responsible. Sorry. It does sound a little silly when you're 28. How old? That's how old I am. I can't remember how old I am. Yeah. But anyway, we need to step and to worry about what's between us and him. Now, Peter's response, he doesn't answer with the same word. He says, Lord. In English, he says, Lord, you know all things. I love you. But that's the type of love that you have for a friend. That's, you love your buddies, like I love you, man, sort of a thing. But it's not the kind that steps up and is sacrificial, that would be inconvenience for you. Yeah, I guess I'll help you move, but only once. That's buddy love right there. Take out your friend card. Okay, tear it up. I helped you move. That's where you're at tonight. The kind of love that Jesus is talking about is something that's going to be inconvenience to the point of the cross. Paul says husbands ought to love their wives as Christ loved the church. That's the type of love that Jesus is talking about here. Peter answers him back, yeah, everybody. It's an emotional love. We get along real well. You know me. That's how it is. See what Jesus has to say about that. He says, He saith unto him, feed my lambs. No, you don't love me like that, feed my lambs. Sometimes people try to go off onto this, what's the difference between feed my lambs and feed my sheep? I'm not here to tell you that today. You know what feed my lamb is. Take care of my sheep, take care of my people. And you know, it's easy to write off and say that, well, that's just talking to Peter. Because I'm not Peter, I'm not the rock that the church is built on, as the Catholics would say. I'm not an apostle. I didn't get to write a book of the Bible. I'm not a preacher. I'm not a Sunday school teacher. It's easy to write all that stuff off. But let me tell you, Jesus just commissioned Peter, and I hate to break with everything that society tells you, but I don't think we're all that special as unique individuals. I think that God's talking to humanity here. They could be talking to Brady, feed my sheep. They could be talking to Rachel, feed my sheep. They could be talking to Betty Jo, feed my sheep. You have a flock that God's put you in. They may be the people that you go to work with. They may be the people that you sit in that Sunday school class with. They may be the people that you just happen to bump into. You say, feed my sheep. Because God owns them all. And so in that, I could go on about how worthless sheep are. I already told you they sing when they get wet. But sheep are finicky creatures. They call upon you, they'll die on you at the drop of a hat. You leave sheep out in the cold, you figure they've got wool on them. They'll be all right. They'll freeze. Jesus tells them, take care of my sheep, even though they're not convenient animals. Something to me. And he says it again. He says, Jesus asks him, Peter, do you love me? Lovest thou me? Again, it's that God love that he asks him about. He doesn't bother with everybody else. Peter answers him back. He says, Lord, you know all things. I love you, love you. Doesn't change his story. At least he stuck to it this time. He says, Jesus tells him, feed my sheep. And then here's the interesting thing. This kind of hit me about after 4 hours of studying this passage. He says, in the last time, verse 17 says, saith unto him the third time, Simon, son of Jonas, lovest thou me? And you don't get it because it's in English, but he changed the word. He says, do you even buddy love me? The word that he was saying back to him. And Peter was grieved because he said unto him the third time, lovest thou me? See, it's sometimes not just what you say, it's how you say it. He asked him 3 times in a row, you even love me? You even my... He comes this time, he says, you even my friend. That hurt him. I don't like repeating myself twice. Have you ever asked him, if you say what more than 3 times, they'll say, never mind? Peter says, he's just hurt by it. Not just the wording, but the fact that he had to ask a third time, even though he was answering. He says, thou knowest all things. I love thee. Jesus says, feed my sheep. Shepherd my sheep. You know, this is the purpose of life. And you know, feeding sheep, that can seem to be like sometimes a rather pointless thing to do because they just keep eating. They eat. They get a little bigger. Their hair gets a little longer. Maybe sure. And another year goes by and they just eat, and get bigger and bigger and bigger. But there's no end in sight. Sometimes people get discouraged because there's no apparent end in sight. You know, when they tell runners that they're running those long marathons, pick out a spot. Don't make it too far. But pick out a spot that you can run to the next point, the next thing, to the next point. But this commission is a lifelong commission. Now, some of y'all have been here for 60, 70 years. Maybe there are some of y'all even in your 80s. I'm not going to ask you how long it's been, but there's quite a few of y'all seen men die a lot younger. I had friends that passed away early on, and they never knew what that last milestone they were going to go for. So sometimes it gets tiring, this purpose that we have. You know, this is the purpose to which we've been called. This one may even be a new story for Robin, so she can tune in. But I was working at a youth convention. Some of y'all may not know this, but I was a little rough around the edges when I was younger. Well, anyway, I forget side, I wasn't raised in church. I was at a youth leadership retreat sort of thing, and the guy was talking about drinking underage and teenage drinking. And he said, you know, I can't even really get grasp on this. He said, has anybody ever, because this was the guy that was leading it, had been in church 9 months before he was born. He said, I can't even really get my mind around it. How do people drink until they black out? And I just kind of kept real quiet. I said, has anybody in this room ever even been there? I slid my hand up and everybody just looked at me amazed. They said, why? And I kind of looked down and I remember that was the first time it really hit me. It's because I didn't have any purpose outside of school. See, I was a good athlete. I was a good student. I had friends. I had objectives. I had goals from Monday through Friday. And they ended at 3 o'clock on Friday outside of football season, after the game on Friday evening. But outside of that, there was this void. And so I told them, you know, the reason why I did it was I really didn't want those memories. I didn't have anything. So if there was this blank spot, oh, how much more livable the week would be between the time that I had purpose and time that I had purpose if I minimized that gap in between. And so, do you see what I'm saying? Jesus offers us a purpose 24/7, 365, 366 on leap year. And as long as you're going to be here, Jesus offers us this purpose. And I think sometimes we've forgotten that our purpose is to love unconditionally. Our purpose is to love inconveniently. Our purpose is to love the sheep that God has put around us. Now, did you ever notice that God said, feed my sheep, not feed your sheep? Because there's a few sheep that throughout the years I probably would have called if they were mine. We'll send him on down to auction a little early. You know, the point is he says unconditionally. He says, feed my sheep. He says, feed what's been put around you, what I've given you. And that is our purpose, folks. That is our commission, is to be there, is to love those sheep unconditionally. Now, sometimes that may mean loving them at 3 in the morning. That may mean loving them when times are good. Those are great times to be a shepherd, when you're on the clock and you know the sheep are staying together, when they're just eating and being happy little sheep. Those are great times to be a shepherd, but he's calling us to be a shepherd when times aren't easy. He's calling us to purpose when we had none. And folks, I tell you, being inconvenienced is a whole lot more livable than being on purpose. Rick Warren didn't just randomly pick out the purpose-driven life. He kind of probably sat down and thought, what are people, if I have to sell a book, what kind of a title do I need to put on it? And if our society has become so wandering that it looks for things with purpose, and it'll pick it up, and it'll read it, and it'll reread it, and it will be sold because people look for purpose. And sometimes we confuse this. See, this purpose, this commission that we've been given is not just a means unto an end, it is an end unto itself. This loving, this feeding of sheep is both where we're heading and where we are. We're in the middle of our purpose. And the thing is if your sheep are looking a little sickly, today's a great day to start feeding. Today is a great day to start living with this purpose. You know, Peter already knew who Jesus was. There's a lot of people who don't. That could be one of your purposes. Maybe some of y'all here today that have never met Jesus in a real way. I mean, I'm not talking about shaking his hand and, meeting him face to face. There will be a day that doesn't come. And that's the end time. That's when you die. You'll get to meet him face to face like that. But if you're here and you're living without, if you're just kind of devoid of purpose and you've never met this Jesus person, today's the day to find purpose in your life. Because it's been put here. Actually, that purpose is trying to find you. God is reaching out right now, and he's trying to work in your life. As the musicians come for the invitation, I just want to leave this challenge with you. That Peter didn't know Pentecost was coming. He didn't know that he was going to be Peter. And I may never leave a meeting where there's 3,000 people get saved. I may never go down in history as the great thinkers like Socrates and Aristotle. I may never go down as a military general like, Alexander the Great did. But there's a purpose that is in my life. And that is the purpose that God would have for me. And that is a purpose that you can have also. If you would, pray with me. Father, I thank you for this day. I thank you for this word. Lord, I ask that you would write on the table of our hearts that we should live with this purpose of feeding your sheep. Though it sounds so simple, Lord, show us more what it means every day in our lives. Lord, help us to love. Father, if there are some that do not know you, Lord, I ask that today would be the day of salvation. That this would be the day that they find purpose. Lord, we love you. We ask these things to the glory of your Son, Jesus.
Would you stand with me, please? Number 187. Just as I am without one thing, but that my blood was shed for me, and that thou bidst me come to thee, O Lamb of God, I come, just as I am, and waiting on to rid my soul of one dark thought, to thee whose blood can cleanse each spot, O Lamb of God, I come, I Well, hope everybody met the Lord today. I was in His presence, so I hope you will. If there's anybody that has a decision to make and you just didn't think now was the right time, I'll be here afterwards. I'll be here afterwards. And we would just like to thank our guests and our visitors for being here with us today. Stand as we sing the doxology this morning. Praise God, from whom all blessings flow. Praise Him, all creatures here below. Praise Him above the heavenly hosts. Praise Father, Son, and Holy Ghost. Amen. May God go with you.
Turn off.